Hello, and welcome to the School Social Work Praxis Exam Review. Today, we will go over terminology, court cases, laws, and etiologies you want to familiarize yourself with. Standard 1 addresses histories and laws of school social work. Become comfortable with the history of school social work, including ideas such as visiting teachers, which address the work between home and school, and focused on the conditions of the family, the neighborhood, or schools themselves that may have prevented students from attending. Also, visiting teachers focused on students such as immigrant students, economically and socially oppressed, students with disabilities, impoverished, and/or delinquent students. Also become familiar with compulsory school attendance, which was passed roughly in 1895 to 1918, which no longer identified compulsory or mandated attendance just for the elite, but for everyone. Thus, education was then considered a necessary preparation for modern life to help a child adjust normally to their environment. Goals of public education, such as cultural competence and awareness, civic responsibility, and student achievement. Also, become aware of court cases such as Brown v. Board of Education, which was a significant case that identified education as a constitutional right. Thus, what the type of education available to one must be available to all on an equal basis. Also, the Board of Education of Oklahoma versus Dowell, as well as the Kerner Commission. The Board of Education of Oklahoma v. Dowell set a precedent to allow school districts to be released from desegregation orders if they could prove that they had successfully integrated their public schools. The Kerner Commission sought to investigate the cause of the 1967 race riots in the United States. And the report indicated that poverty, institutional, and white racism were driving the inner city violence, which resulted in about 43 deaths in Detroit and 26 in Newark. Also, become familiar with the various school social work roles, including assessment, consultation, attendance, special education, and mental health provider. Understand the various models of school social work, including macro, state legislation approaches, as well as micro, direct, frontline, and hands on interventions, and indirect consultation roles. Also know who Horace Mann is, an American educator for public education. He stated that the primary purpose of education is to enhance societal well-being and self-efficiency. He believed education should be free, universal, non-sectarian, a civic virtue, and that it builds character. Mann believed education was central to good citizenship, democratic participation, and societal well-being. He took the stance that every child should receive a basic education funded by local taxes. Familiarize yourself with other federal and state laws related to school social work, such as IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which makes available a free and appropriate education to eligible children with disabilities with the least restrictive placement. IDEA ensures special education and related services are provided to students with disabilities. It requires all states to find children in need of special education and educate them regardless of whether or not they attend private school. NCLB, or the No Child Left Behind Act, reauthorized the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. It included Title I provision applying to disadvantaged students. The purpose of No Child Left Behind was to ensure that students in every public school achieved important learning goals while being educated in safe classrooms by well prepared teachers. School districts were required to work toward a staff to student ratio of two school social workers to 800 students. NCLB ensured that schools boost the performance of those disadvantaged students. Become familiar with ESSA, Every Student Succeed Act, which replaced NCLB, the No Child Left Behind Act. The purpose of ESSA is to make sure public schools provide a quality education for all students. ESSA gives states and local districts more of a say in how schools account for student achievement. It provides funding to school districts with a high percentage of students from low income families. Understand FERPA, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, which was enacted in 1974 and protects the privacy of student education records. FERPA gives parents certain protections with regard to their children's education records, such as report cards, transcripts, disciplinary records, contact and family information, in classes taken, etc. Parents can inspect and review these records and seek corrections if they feel they are inaccurate. The McKinney-Vento Act is a homeless assistance act that authorizes the federal education for homeless children and youth. It provides specific rights and services to children and youth experiencing homelessness. These services include transportation for youth, free field trips, free uniforms, free breakfast and lunch, and the exemption from certain school-based fees. The Education for All Handicapped Children Act guarantees a free, appropriate public education for each child with a disability in every state and locality across the country. Understand and be aware of HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, which is a federal law that protects sensitive patient health information. Also, understand what FAPE is, or Free Appropriate Public Education. On a state level, you want to be familiar with the Wisconsin attendance law, what is considered truant and habitual truancy. The Department of Public Instruction for Wisconsin, or commonly known as DPI, regulates that a student is considered truant if he or she is absent without an acceptable excuse for all or parts of one or more days during which school is held. A student qualifies as habitually truant when she or he is absent without an acceptable excuse all or parts of 5 or more days in a school semester. If a student misses part or all of 5 or more days without an acceptable excuse in a school semester, the student is considered habitually truant, and a truant referral may be made by the school against the student under Wisconsin Statute Section 118.16(5). Become familiar with the NASW, National Association of Social Work Code of Ethics, 6 values: competency, integrity, service, social justice, dignity and worth of a person, and importance of human relationships. Also become familiar with the NASW standards: ethics and values, qualifications, assessments, intervention, decision making and practice evaluation, record keeping, workload management, professional development, cultural competence, interdisciplinary leadership and collaboration, and advocacy. Understand that the NASW Code of Confidentiality can be violated for compelling professional reasons. Familiarize yourself with ethical problem solving steps, including know yourself, analyzing the dilemma, seeking consultation, identifying the courses of action, managing the clinical concerns, enacting the decision that will be made, and reflecting on the process. These steps can be found in the school social work practice policy and research textbook. Understand the idea behind the duty to warn, that school social workers can disclose confidential information when it poses a threat to themselves or someone else, and that school social workers do not have to disclose if a student is using illegal drugs. Also understand the idea of informed assent, which is a term to express a student's willingness to participate in research, but are too young to give informed consent, yet old enough to understand the proposed research in general. Basically, it indicates that a student has some acceptance um, with working with the school social worker. Standard 3 seeks to address social and economic justice in populations at risk. No terms such as resilient, a person that is able to withstand or recover quickly from difficult situations or conditions; racism, prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against a person or people on the basis of their membership in a particular racial or ethnic group, typically one that is a minority or marginalized group. Racism includes the belief that one race is superior over another. It is a social and political construction of race. Ethnicity, the fact or state of belonging to a social group that has a common national or cultural tradition. Common understanding of race: national, tribal, religious, linguistic, cultural, or background origin. Institutional racism, also known as systematic racism, is a form of racism that is embedded as a normal practice within society or in an organization. Covert racism is a form of discrimination that is disguised and subtle rather than obvious. Housing discrimination, redlining, unfair lending prices, denying access, certain educational pedagogies. Overt racism is a form of discrimination that is observable. Stereotyping, language, racist speech, attitude, derogatory remarks. Intention to scare, intimidate, or terrorize all fall under overt racism. Prejudice is a biased or preconceived opinion, idea, or belief about something, especially if these opinions are hostile regarding an ethnic, racial, social, or religious group. At risk youth, a person who is less likely to transition successfully into adulthood. Also expound on the idea of at risk and consider the results that a lack of anti racist education may have at the risk of producing more oppressors. Oppression, prolonged cruel or unjust treatment or control. The state of being subject to unjust treatment um, or mental pressures or distress. And discrimination, the unfair or prejudicial treatment of people and groups on characteristics such as race, gender, age, or sexual orientation. Remember that discrimination often stems from fear and misunderstanding. Standard 4 addresses assessment. Know what an individualized family service plan or IFSP is. It's a plan to obtain special education services for young children within the United States public school system. It is provided by law to families of eligible children from birth to 3 years old. The primary agency in managing the plan is the family. Also know what an individualized education program, or commonly IEP, is, which is a plan to obtain special education services for children 4 and older. Know that IEPs are reviewed and revised yearly. In regards to IEPs, school social workers should know what testing criteria should be used based on the criteria area. For example, if a school social worker is on an IEP team that is looking at a student for intellectual disability or ID, the school social worker should know that they should conduct an IBIS assessment, an interview with the parent, and a parent's social history. Know that transition plans consist of student strengths, preferences, and needs. Also know that post-secondary transition to training starts at age 16, which means that a student with the IEP, once they turn 18, the IEP will start to focus on transitioning needs as they proceed out of secondary education. Know that parents, guardians, the LEA or local education agency, a regular education teacher, as well as a special education teacher, and someone to interpret the results are all expected to attend the IEP meeting. Also, know that parents can bring in an attorney to the IEP meeting. Foster parents can refer a student for an IEP but cannot sign consent. Vouchers or choice schools in Wisconsin are not required to provide special education. However, if a family is interested or needing special education support, then that responsibility lies on the public school in that family's area instead of the choice or voucher school that the student attends. School social workers can provide counseling services as a related service. on an IEP. However, counselors cannot provide school social work service as a related service on an IEP. Students with disabilities should be educated in the least restrictive environments. And also know that a student can meet criteria for special education but not need an IEP. They could, however, be eligible for a 504. A school social worker, as a related service, should be to support the student in the area of the criteria. Know that a school social worker needs to have problem solving and team building skills as it relates to an IEP. School social workers do not have to share all of the information received from the social history interview during an IEP. Only certain type of information should be shared. Information that impacts the student's academics or behavior at school, such as trauma, mental illness, and or substance abuse. Remember, a major part of the social history obtained from the parents during an IEP is to understand how the background environment of the student may impact school performance. Also, remember, a school team has 60 days after consent has been received to complete an IEP. If a student meets criteria for EBD and requires social emotional skills, a school social worker could be written into the IEP. If a student meets criteria for a specific learning disability and is angry at his math support teacher, he would not receive school social work services as a related service or as someone to talk to. So, those are also examples of when or why a school social worker may be written into into an IEP. Know the disability criteria areas. You have specific disability, intellectual disability, autism, which looks different than the clinical definition or the DSM definition of autism. So the school criteria is different than the DSM criteria for autism. Emotional behavior disability, EBD. Um, for EBD, a student needs to present behaviors in two areas: home, community, and or school. Significant developmental delay, also known as SDD. Other health impairment, also known as OHI. Visual impairment, deafness, hearing impairment, deaf or blindness, orthopedic impairment, multiple disabilities, or traumatic brain injury all fall under that OHI criteria. And then you have speech and language, which is another criteria. However, the school social worker is typically not on a speech and language IEP. There must be another area of disability criteria that must be looked at in order to have the presence of the school social worker. So maybe an intellectual disability as well as speech and language would then result in the school social worker being a part of that IEP process. Know that a 504 um, is for a student that is determined to have a disability, maybe physical or mental impairment affecting the body, such as diabetes, cancer, or sickle cell, but do not require an IEP. A medical diagnosis is not a requirement to qualify for a 504. A 504 also does not require a special education teacher to be assigned, nor does it require a school social worker to be a part of the team. Know about assessing adaptive behavior. And what are some adaptive assessments? So, assessing adaptive behavior includes looking at what a student typically does. Assessing adaptive behavior must be done in multiple environments, and it can be done by interviewing the students, interviewing the parents, and interviewing the teachers. Thus, assessments can be given to teachers, parents, paraprofessionals, whomever interacts with the student, the basketball coach, and especially done when the parent has either elevated or low scores. Naturally, one of the school social work roles is to obtain the adaptive skills information. The information that deals with how the student functions in their environment. And when we look at adaptive skills, we're looking at a young child's um, typical performance of self care. Can they tie their shoes? Can they put things in the microwave? Can they brush their teeth? Button up their clothes? Those adaptive assessments vary and are specific based off of particular developmental benchmarks. So, some forms of adaptive assessments that you want to be aware of include the functional behavior assessments, or FBA, which is an approach to figure out how or why a student behaves a certain way. It uses different methods to figure out what is behind behavior challenges. The basic idea is that a student's behavior serves a purpose. Students act a certain way for a reason. Steps to a BFA include interviewing and observing students and asking the teacher and parent to complete a behavior rating scale. FBAs help support the Behavior Intervention Plan, or BIP. It's best practice It's best practice to complete the FBA first, and the FBA is required for an IEP. A behavior intervention plan, or BIP, is typically based off of the results of an FBA, of that functional behavior assessment. It includes a description of the problem behavior and a hypothesis as to why the problem behavior occurs, intervention strategies that include positive behavioral supports. After creating the BIP, you would develop a progress monitoring tool to determine or assess if the BIP is working. Various observations that a school social worker may use include an ABC, the antecedent behavior consequence. It is a direct observation tool that can be used to collect information about the events that are occurring within a student's environment. You have an event observation, which involves the observation of specific accidents, incidents, or behaviors. It observes or records how many times a child shows a specific action or behavior in a specified amount of time. The purpose is to understand why a child may display such actions or behaviors, such as being out of seat, leaving the classroom, talking out of turn. A duration and latency observation measures time. However, latency is how long it takes the behavior to start, and duration is how long the behavior lasts. So we may use a duration and latency observation to observe disruptive class behaviors. And then you have the riot observation, review, interview, observe, and test, where we would review historical records, interview key stakeholders, family members, teachers, coaches, observe performance in real time functional settings, classrooms, at home, maybe during practice. We then test students through careful use of appropriately matched measurement technologies. More terms to know are ableism, the discrimination of and social prejudice against people with disabilities based on the belief that typical abilities are superior. Sexism, prejudice, stereotyping, or discrimination, typically against women on the basis of sex. Classism, prejudice against or unfavor of people belonging to a particular social class. Microaggressions, a statement, action, or incident regarded as an instance of indirect, subtle, or unintentional discrimination against members of a marginalized group, such as a racial or ethnic minority. Microaggressions tend to be indirect, subtle, unintentional, but discriminatory. Intersectionality theory. Excuse me. The idea that people whose individual identities overlap with a number of marginalized groups' experiences, multiple overlapping threats of discrimination and oppression. Intersectionality theory includes things such as race, class, gender identity, and sexual orientation. And religion. Stereotyping. A stereotype is a mistaken idea or belief many people have about a thing or group that is based upon how they look on the outside. Stereotypes may be untrue or only partially true. Stereotyping people is a type of prejudice because what is on the outside is a small part of who a person is. Social oppression is unfairly treating a person or group of people who are different from other people or groups of people. One group benefit from the systematic abuse, white privilege or gender, and benefits from the exploitation of the other group, discrimination. Understand stratification, an arrangement of something into different groups, the categorization of people into different social classes, a structured inequality of sorts, inequity in income, in wealth, distribution, social status. Understand pluralism, political theory of power sharing among political parties, a system in which two or more states, groups, principles, or sources of authority coexist. They maintain their own traditions but work together to value the traits of other traditions. Ethnocentrism, the idea that one may see his or her culture as the correct way of living. No affirmative action, a policy in which an individual color, sex, race, religion, or natural origin is considered to increase opportunity provided to an underrepresented part of society. Remember that background and experiences of oppressed people are not the same. Understand self advocacy, which means knowing yourself, know your needs and how to get your needs met, and know how to respect others, and the idea of advocacy in general, public support for or recommendation of a particular cause or policy. Standard 5 addresses prevention and intervention. Know about trauma, what it is, how it impacts students, and what students that may have experienced trauma may need. Know that structure and predictability are important for those that may have experienced a trauma. Also, know that students heal from a cognitive behavioral therapy approach or a CBT approach. Be familiar with the ACEs study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences, which seeks to survey a person's traumatic experiences occurring before they turn 18 years old. Know that ACEs survey trauma events, poverty, homelessness, and out of home care circumstances. Also, know that about 34, 35 million children have been impacted by ACEs. Become familiar with restorative justice and restorative practices. Know that restorative justice and practices can be used to address discipline infractions, to build community, allows for victims to be heard, to build relationships, to resolve disagreements, to engage in acts of empathy and forgiveness, and to allow for people to take ownership of their behavior. Also know about the RTI and PBIS framework. RTI, which stands for Response to Intervention. Know about the Tier 1 Universal response, which indicates that about 80% of the student body is receiving or responding to a tier 1 intervention. Know about tier 2, in which 10 to 20% of the student body may be receiving or responding to the intervention, such as check in, check out. And that tier 3 targets about 5% of the educational body. And an example would be educational wraparound. Also, know about the aspects of group work. Know the importance of the beginning rapport building aspect of group work, establishing group roles and expectations, as well as that middle functioning of the group, where the group owns its curriculum, owns the processes of the group, and also ensuring that you are adhering to the group curriculum with fidelity. And the middle of group work, which is the end and termination. So, understanding those processes, the beginning, the middle, and the end. Become familiar with the social emotional developmental stages, including ages 0 to 3, where students are learning about their work and their senses, learning to manipulate objects, developing memory and imagination. Ages 4 to 6, where students can identify with parents, become more independent, sensitive to others' emotions and feelings. Ages 7 to 12, we're looking at students developing a greater sense of self, focusing more on school activities, and negotiating for greater independence. Ages 13 to 18, they're developing their own identity, building close relationships, ties to balance, and they're trying to balance their peer and group and family interests. At that ages, that adolescence, 13 to 18, we're seeing a higher concern with appearance. So becoming familiar with those social emotional development stages, the Erickson's stages of development, including initiative versus guilt, learning basic trust versus basic mishope or a mistrust, learning autonomy versus shame, initiative versus guilt, industry versus inferiority, learning identity versus identity diffusion, learning intimacy versus isolation, um, generativity versus self absorption, and integrity versus despair. So, becoming very familiar with the social emotional developmental stages as well as the Eric Erickson stages of development. Remember to, as you consider prevention and intervention, to operate from a strengths based perspective, considering that all people have strengths and capacities. People can change and grow through their strengths and capacities. And knowing that people's problems can blind them from recognizing their strengths, and that resilience is the ability to overcome stress or trauma. Remember that change is difficult, even for individuals who are well adjusted. As a school social worker, you may also be tasked with the professional development of your peers. So, also understanding for adult learners the opportunity for engagement, focusing on the information that is relevant to the audience. Understand the idea of transference or the ability for a learner to apply or practice what has been learned in a new setting. Understand self determination or the point in which a person controls their own life. Understand the idea of consultation and that teacher consultation is important as it helps teachers um, with students that have behavior challenges. Through consultation, you may alleviate the amount of school social work referrals you receive in general. Being able or having the ability to help staff become more effective in dealing with their work related problems becomes a result of teacher consultation. Know what zero tolerance is, and that it is a strict enforcement of regulations and bans against behaviors um, or the possession of items deemed undesirable by school officials. Zero tolerance does not allow for any mitigating circumstances. Oftentimes, zero tolerance policies are associated with racial disproportionality, increased incidence of suspensions and expulsions, and elevated dropout rates for minorities. Know that suspensions of black and brown children are impacted by zero tolerance policies much higher rates than any other race or ethnicity. Understand that part of the relationship development requires building trust. Know that the mental health framework is a strong universal implementation that is integrated into leadership teams, that is integrated into the youth, family, school, community collaboration. That the mental health framework serves as a culturally responsive, evidence-based practice, that it is data-based for continuous improvement, that it seeks to foster positive school culture and climate, that it seeks to address staff mental health, attitudes, competencies, and wellness, and that the mental health framework is a systematic professional development and implementation tool, that it promotes confidentiality in mental health policies, and that it seeks to offer a continuum of supports, including cognitive behavior therapy, which is a psychosocial intervention that aims to improve mental health. CBT focuses on challenges, on changing unhelpful cognitive distortions and behaviors, on improving emotional regulation, and the development of personal coping strategies to target problem solving or to target solving current problems. The mental health framework and the use of cognitive behavior therapy are are attempted to be proactive strategies that focuses on issues pertaining to family structure, roles, and responsibilities. Standard 6 addresses human behavior in the social environment. Become familiar with analytic skills or the skills you use when you detect a pattern, such as brainstorming, observing, interpreting, integrating, theorizing, and making decisions based on the multiple factors and options available to you. Understand what political skills are, or the skills you use when you have the ability to influence others, your networking ability, serving on a school association, legislative committee, advocacy, providing inputs on bills. So understanding what may classify as political skills or value clarifying skills, the skills you use when you include integrity, privacy, family, honesty, harmony, and loyalty into your practice. Understand interactional skills, the skills you use when you actively listen, when you collaborate well with others, when you utilize clear communication skills, the ability to bring people together, to resolve conflicts, and to form committees. Those would be considered interactional skills. Mobilization, which isn't on here, but that process of making something capable, promoting movement to have people and resources ready to move or react or act. Understand the systems theory, which is an interdisciplinary theory about the nature of complex systems in nature, in society, and in science. Systems theory is a framework by which one can investigate and or describe any groups of objects that work together to produce some similar results. So, interrelationships in nature, in physics, in chemistry, biology, and social relationships. Psychodynamic theory seeks to, or also called the psychoanalytic theory, seeks to explain personality in terms of unconscious psychological processes. For example, our wishes and fears of which we're not fully aware. Know that psychodynamic or psychoanalytic theory contends that childhood experiences are crucial in shaping our adult personality. Know that it that emotions has a central place in human behavior. Be aware of conflict theory, or the theory that society is in a state of perpetual conflict because of competition for limited resources. Conflict theory holds that social order is maintained by domination and power rather than by consensus and conformity. It indicates that power is unequally divided. Also understands social learning theory, which emphasizes the importance of observing, modeling, and imitating the behaviors, attitudes, and emotional reactions of others. Social learning theory considers how both environmental and cognitive factors interact to influence human learning and behavior. Social learning theory focuses a bit on observations. Become familiar with biopsychosocial model, which addresses the hereditary nature, the emotional problems, the psychological problems, as well as the social influences of environmental problems. So the biopsychosocial model incorporates our biology, our emotions, our psychology, as well as our social and environmental problems. Understand case management guiding principles, autonomy, justice, non malfeasance, and beneficence. Standard 7 addresses diversity. Understand cultural competence and that it is the ability to understand, communicate with, and effectively interact with people across cultures. Cultural competence encompasses being aware of our own worldview. It is also a good place to begin to develop a multicultural environment. When working with diverse populations, make sure everyone feels valued and that everyone feels included. Understand advocating, which is the public supporting or recommendation of a particular cause, policy, or person. Also understand affirming, which is the validation of a student's concern, offering emotional support and encouragement. Analyzing, which is the methodical examination um, of the constitution or structure of something, especially information, typically for purposes of explanation and interpretation. So, understanding that analyzing situations and circumstances, policies and procedures, you are methodically examining the structure of something with the purpose of explaining and interpreting it. Understanding assessing or the evaluation or estimating the nature, ability, or quality of something. Understanding cultural humility, a lifelong process of self reflection and self critique, whereby the individual not only learns about another culture, but one starts with an examination of his or her own beliefs and cultural identities. Cultural humility gives value to the practice of listening. It also embraces voices other than our own while acknowledging that we are not the expert. Standard 8 is a review of research. Understand evidence based social work practices, decision making based on research, school social work clinical expertise, school social work values, as well as client wishes. Know what norm reference tests are, which are tests that compare a person to another person that should be at the same developmental or normal level. Understand problem solving steps, including defining the problem, clarifying the problem, defining the goals, identifying the root cause of the problem, developing an action plan, excuse me, executing the action plan, evaluating the results, and continuing to improve that progress monitoring aspect. Know what qualitative data is, which is defined as the data that approximates and characterizes. This data is non numerical in nature. This type of data is collected through methods of observations, one on one interviews, conducting focus groups, and similar methods like that. So, qualitative data would be a teacher overview of how a student is doing, a time sample observation, in depth interviews, focus groups, or case studies. Quantitative data is data expressing a certain quantity, amount, or range. Usually, there are measurement units associated with the data. Meters, for example, the height of a person, for another example. It makes sense to set boundary limits to such data, and it is also meaningful to apply arithmetic operations to the data. So, applying some math solutions. So, quantitative data may have a numerical nature. So, like some examples of quantitative data would be check in and check out data, or probability and non probability sampling. Also, become familiar with reliability, which is defined as the probability that a product, system, or service will perform as is intended to function adequately for a specific period, for a specified period of time, or that it will operate in a defined environment without failure. So, basic reliability. Will it do what it says it's supposed to do when it's supposed to do it? Now that we have wrapped up a review of the content for the exam, we will go over some mock exam questions. Please feel free to give the answer that you think is correct. Number one, a student is brought to the school social worker due to a bruise on the student's face. The school social worker asks the student about the bruise. The student stated that her father would be mad if she said anything. In continued conversation, the student discloses that her father hit her in the face with his fist because she was eating too slow. The school social worker should A. Schedule an appointment with the principal to discuss the situation. B. Contact the father to validate what the student said. C. Immediately report the conversation and bruise to Child Protective Services. Or D. Document the conversation and check on the student regularly. The answer is C. Immediately report the conversation and bruise to Child Protective Services. Question 2. Students that are non documented and are residing with relatives are unable to be covered by McKinney-Vento. True or false? The answer is false. The student who is residing with relatives would be covered under the McKinney-Vento Act. Question 3. Which of the following would not be covered by McKinney-Vento Acts? a family residing with grandparents, a family living in a hotel, a youth that has ran away from home, or a youth that is residing with her best friend because they want to walk to school together. The answer is D. A youth that is residing with her best friend because they want to walk to school together. Remember that the McKinney-Vento Act covers families that are not in a stable residence of their own. So it does include stable housing of another relative, but that is not the housing of the student family. A student is referred to the school social worker due to significant changes in his behavior. When the school social worker asks the student what has caused the sudden changes in his destructive behavior, the student responds to the school social worker and says, I will tell you what is going on if you promise not to tell my parents. The most appropriate response from the school social worker should be, yeah, I promise not to tell. B, I would never violate your confidentiality. C, I will keep everything confidential as long as you are not planning to harm yourself or anyone else. Or D, your secret is safe with me. The answer is C. I will keep everything confidential as long as you are not planning to harm yourself or someone else. This allows that conversation or the notification that I can keep it safe unless there is some issue or concern requiring that we consult with someone else. In Wisconsin, if you are appropriately trained, you can utilize physical restraints in the schools. True or false? The answer is true. What federal act focuses on the academic performance of marginalized students? Every Student Succeeds Act, IDEA, No Child Left Behind, or the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. Again, what act focuses on the academic performance of marginalized students? The answer is C. No Child Left Behind. What is an what is an example of an inclusion setting for LGBT plus students? Pictures of LGBT rights activists in the classroom. Support groups and hotline information is visible in the building. Staff uses the proper pronoun to identify students. And the school chooses a day to celebrate LGBT plus students. The answer is C. Staff uses the proper pronouns to identify students. All other examples are indicative of allyship and supporting LGBT plus lifestyles. However, the use of proper pronouns does indicate an inclusive setting. Be very careful as the exam will have or will ask questions where all of the answers may seem like good answers. In that respect, you want to select the best answer. Next question. When a school social worker is forming a group to be part of a committee to tackle a concern, the school social worker is displaying what type of skill? Political skill, value clarifying skill, interactional skill, or analytical skill? The answer is C, interactional skill. The school social worker is forming a committee to tackle a concern. Thus, they are incorporating their interactional skill of mobilizing. In 1954, Wood's Supreme Court case stated that education must be available for all on an equal basis. Griffin v. School Board of Prince Edward County, Green v. County School Board of New Kent County, Brown v. Board of Education, or Parents Involved in Community Schools v. Seattle School District. The answer is C. Brown v. Board of Education. What federal act supports local school districts that have students performing below the state requirements? Every Student Succeed Act, ESSA, No Child Left Behind, the Family Education and Rights to Privacy Act, or Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. The answer is A. Every Student Succeed Act, ESSA. What is a simple intervention that can be used for a student that has been diagnosed with ADHD? Sit at the back of the classroom. Sit next to a peer that knows how to focus. Take a break or put their head down. The correct answer is C. Take a break. What is not an example of a systemic racism in schools? Minority students are more likely than others to be held accountable to the zero tolerance policy. Minority students make up over half of the suspension rates. Minority students receive harsher consequences, or minority students receive free transportation to school if they live in the busing region. The answer is D. Minority students receiving free transportation to school if they live in the busing region is not an example of systematic racism in schools. Which example best describe a form of covert racism in schools? Lack of resources or funding, all white teachers in a predominantly black school, only white students in advanced placement courses, lack of equity in discipline practices. The answer is C. Only white students in advanced placement courses would best describe a form of covert racism in the school system. Which act in 1974 allows parents to inspect, review, and seek changes if they feel information is inaccurate? FAPE, NCLB, FERPA, or the McKinney-Vento? The answer is FERPA. DPI has adopted the Wisconsin state law that states that a student is considered truant if they have missed 5 or more days without an acceptable excuse. True or false? The answer is true. Which NASW Code of Ethics value state that a social worker should have skills, knowledge, and a positive attitude that empowers others? Would that be service, integrity, competence, or dignity and worth of a person? The answer is competence. C. Which NASW standard states that a social worker should recognize the complexity of the population and be alert to address possible dilemmas and value conflicts as they occur? Would that be assessments, intervention, ethics and values, or advocacy? The answer is C, ethics and values. What is not an ethical problem solving step? Enact a decision, analyze the dilemma, reflect on the process, or accept your emotions. The answer is D, accept your emotions. Although a good practice, it is not an ethical problem solving step. Students that are discriminated against because of their race, sexual gender, and social class describes which theory? Intersectionality, stereotyping, stratification, and ethnocentrism. The answer is A, intersectionality, as we are seeing discrimination against their identity, their racial identity, against their gender identity, and against their social class. What does LEA stand for? Local Education Ally, Local Educational Agency, Local Educators Assessment, and Local Educational Association. The answer is B, Local Educational Agency. Please take your time and read each question thoroughly. Look at terms like required and always to help you make the best decision. Look at the last sentence. Is it asking what do you do first? Or is it asking what is the best next step? As we conclude this school social work praxis exam review, I wish you the best of luck and well wishes.